This is Greg Soul, and welcome to Why Am I? A podcast where I talk to interesting people to see how they got to where they are today. Today's guest is Owen Egerton. He's an amazing writer, director, comedian, father, lover. Who's to say? It's been a long time that I've been a fan of his. I think since about the year 2000 is when I found him, and I've been enjoying his humor and his spirit ever since. And I hope you enjoyed part one of my conversation with Owen. Owen Egerton, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Excellent. I'm going to do the thing where I talk about you a little bit. I'm going to dote on you really quickly. I'll do it 100 miles an hour because most people, don't like hearing themselves talked about, although you might be the other kind of guy. You the other kind of guy or what?
I play a constant reminder of how cool I am to myself. It's the only podcast I listen to. It's just me.
Well, I noticed you walked in with your boombox. You have your own hype track that you come into the room with, so that's good. Always pumping yourself up. All right, so you are a film writer director. You've done at least 3 movies, right? So you did Mercy Black, which is on Netflix, and I watched it, and I really and thoroughly enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks.
My wife isn't like crazy about scary stuff, but she was down. She enjoyed it. You did Bloodfest, which I still haven't watched, and then you did Follow. I'm gonna just make a little mental note here that these are horror movies.
Yes.
You also wrote and starred in a play. You did The Other Side of Sleep.
That's right.
You've written multiple books. You are a very accomplished writer.
Yeah.
I'm not going to read off what all of them are, but you've also, I think, haven't you done some stuff for NPR?
I have, yeah. NPR? Done a little bit of stuff for NPR, like a podcast for them called The Write-Up, where I interviewed authors.
Excellent. And then you're doing one right now with Texas Monthly and Frost Bank called The Good News Podcast.
Yeah, it's been fun. Telling good stories, exploring the myth, or not the myth, the dream of optimism. I
have thoroughly enjoyed. I have been. I put you guys at 1.7 speed, and I've been consuming you. So I've been having a lot of fun with that. You've also, I believe, I'm not sure if you're doing it now, but you've taught some drama classes, right?
Yeah. I've taught some improv, and I've taught some creative writing classes. I teach right now with the Sundance Institute. I teach screenwriting, horror screenwriting with them, which is super fun. Yeah.
Excellent.
I haven't taught improv in a while, though. It'd be fun to kind of do that.
Nothing to it but to do it.
Yeah.
So, also, I believe you're an ordained minister. Is that correct?
That's true. That's true, too. Yes.
So do you need to change the way I refer to you, or
please don't?
So I'm assuming you did that to marry some folks, right?
Well, there's a long history there. Yes, but in a different time in my life, I was devoutly religious, and so it came out of that. So I mean, I did in the end. It was because there was a need at some point to marry somebody, but I was I was also very, very active in like religious organizations and actually evangelical America. I was ordained by the Evangelicals of America, which I'm not actually proud of. I left that world, and I left that faith, and I have a lot of thoughts about that. But yeah, I'm ordained.
That's cool. I mean, saying you're not very proud of that. Everything's part of the journey, right? So
that's true. Everything's part of the journey.
Yeah. It's made you who you are, and I freaking love you, dude. So
well, thanks.
I'm glad you did it. So the part that comes in that is really interesting to me is the way I was introduced to you, and that's through Master Pancake Theater.
Yeah.
So that is a weird. I'm sure there's a lot of folks listening to this. Well, I don't know. Pretty much everybody I know has heard me talk about it at one point or another. So when I was in high school, a senior in high school in the year 2000, I went and saw Terminator at Master Pancake Theater. Or I guess back then it was the Sinus.
Yeah.
Mr. Sinus.
Yeah.
So it is, the way I described it to people, it's like, think of Mystery Science Theater 3000, But those guys were on cable television, right? So they had to be somewhat family friendly. And so basically remove all restrictions, all logic, all morals, and every fart and dick joke that you could think of is that. And if you're really lucky, you'll see somebody in the cast in their underwear. So you guys have entertained me for a long. You know what's really interesting is we would go to shows, and some I would like a lot more than others, and I never really put it all together as to why until we hit this pandemic that we find ourselves in, and you guys started doing Master Pancake online. And so I started seeing your faces and really getting to know who you were, and I started putting it together. It's the Owen heavy episodes that I really love. And so my wife, my kids, we are all super Owen fans. And, I've been kind of trying to change the way I look at the world, and I try and do it through emotion and feeling and why am I so drawn to these various things. And I think it's interesting because I look at like some of your writing and some of your movies, it's horror, it's kind of dark comedy, it's, the scarier side of life. But when I look at you, you give me this feeling of just unabashed hope and optimism. You are like a ball of sunshine on speed and meth and cocaine, kind of this interesting. It's just
speed, meth, and cocaine.
Hey, bud, we're all in, right? In for a penny, in for a pound. So that juxtaposition is so fascinating to me that it's like how you kind of like horror stuff, but you are so optimistic, and I just want you to be like, I just want you to be my friend. It's like, I want you to call me every morning and say, Greg, you're going to do great. It's going to be awesome. It's like, yeah, where does this come from? That's what fascinates me. It's like, where does this come from? This weird juxtaposition that you find.
That's a really good question. Like, because that's a really good question. I'm a big believer. I mean, we were talking about that whole Texas optimism project, the good that I do with Texas Monthly and all that. And that's all about optimism, but like, optimism is never in my mind like, hey, everything's great. That's just, bullshit.
Yeah.
The optimism is like, oh, hey, let's look at really, really how horrible the world is, and then see also with open eyes how wonderful the world is. And that's what kind of always fascinates me is like, man, life is pretty freaking amazing, and it's simultaneously freaking horrible. Like those things happening simultaneously is fascinating. It means I can't get it. I really can't wrap my head around the world. And I think that's what kind of keeps me going. Horror specifically, like I for some reason I find horror really life affirming. I think for a bunch of different reasons. I think because when I was a kid, it was this fun place where I played with mortality. When you're a kid, I was kind of growing up in a small little town, kind of a suburb of Houston. And of course, no one's telling you you're going to die. No one tells kids that no one tells you that it doesn't matter. Like, especially like, oh no, it doesn't matter. Like, they'll say, listen, if you do stupid things, like, eat glass or something like that, you're going to die. Like those kind of warnings they give you. But there's this idea that if you're careful enough and if you're good enough, you'll never die. There's a secret kind of message that we tell ourselves, we tell our children, like, if you do all the right things, you'll never die. We know this is not true in our head, but in our heart, we kind of feel it. Yeah. But in horror movies, you can be, smart and good and running away at a top speed, and the killer's just walking, and you're running. And it doesn't matter. Somehow the killer gets in front of you and you slam right into the killer's machete. And that's death. Like, it's going to get you sooner or later. So everyone dies, even good people who don't deserve it.
Yeah,
and so there's something life affirming, like, oh, so you better live. So you better really, really live. Maybe that sounds a bit apologetic.
It's amazing. It's like, I love that analogy because the killer is death. It doesn't matter how slow he seems or how dim-witted. He's coming for you.
Yep.
And
he'll get you in the end.
Yeah. Inevitably, he's going to get you. And I think that's what you said earlier is, I just kind of had galaxy brain. The idea that optimism isn't, burying your head in the sand. It's looking at the world with eyes wide open. Because for me, I always used to sort of think that, optimists, that's what they would kind of do. They would, while that, I assume they realized that the world can be a bad place, that they sort of just ignored all of that and just pretended like it didn't exist. But you're saying you just sort of embrace that and understand it for what it is and move past it, sort of thing. I like that.
I don't even know if it's moved past it, actually, Greg. I think it's a little bit like yeah, if you're like, hey, the world's fine, or as the theologians used to say hundreds of years ago, this is the best of all possible worlds. That was a theological idea. Like, the world can't be better than this because God made it, and so has to be the best it can be. All these different ideas. I think that's sort of the false optimism. I think that optimism is like, okay, I'm going to open my eyes and see what's there, and as opposed to like cross my arms and like, and there's nothing we can do about it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take steps towards change and pushing things forward. So I think maybe the key is with optimism, it's probably just pessimism with hope. So like if you can say, oh God, I see the horrors of the world, but I also see something I can do to help, then that leads towards optimism. And maybe this is it. Maybe this is the one aspect of faith of like, you believe that change is possible, that you believe things can get better, for individuals, for communities, for the world as a whole. That can be a great motivator. So it's not just believing things are good. It's understanding that things are hard, but believing that something can be done.
That's so awesome. I can't wait for my 15-year-old to hear this, because he loves to tell me how the world is trash and it's a dumpster fire and it's all bad. And I try and say, while that's true, you've got, I look at your energy like tokens, right? You get so many tokens during the day, and you can spend them on whatever you want. And I choose to spend them on things that will affect change in my life, right? So move towards something that will actually help, right? So I could scream at this black void, or I could actually try and start doing things that are going to help move things forward.
Yeah. My friend Meredith Borders, who is a really cool editor of a magazine called Fangoria and runs a brewery that she and her husband opened in Houston. Super cool person. And she just tweeted, like, I think the day of the inauguration, she basically said, nihilism isn't cool. Doing shit, that's cool. And it just struck me of like, yeah, right. Nihilism, like that, kind of like the world is crap. If you just end there, you're like, oh, this doesn't move me. This doesn't change anything. It feels good, but in the end, it leads to inaction, and and that's a bit of a pity. And I love what you're saying about tokens. I mean, funny that religion keeps coming back into it, but you might remember Jesus had a whole parable that's recorded in the Gospels about the talents. And he talked about a rich man who gave all of his, like, he's like, I'm going out of town. So he gave all his employees or his servants or slaves or whoever they were. So he's like, here, I'm going to give you each, some talents, some coins to work with while I'm gone. And basically he rewards them on what they do. Is like, one is like, well, I invested in this land and I did this. And they're like, great, I'm going to give you a city to run now. And another one's like, well, I've invested in here. It's like, great, I'm going to give you this to run. And then the one that was like, I just buried it. I knew that you were judgmental and I was scared I would lose it and I didn't want to risk it. So I just took that money and I buried it. And then the rich man is like, oh, bad servants. Everything's been taken from you. Even the talents that you have, it's given away, bad. And it's this idea, just like what you're saying, like we have these limited resources of energy and time and talents and opportunities and privilege. And what the hell are you going to do with it? What are you going to do with it during your limited time? Don't bury it.
For sure. I love that. And something I see in you is you have this desire to share the things that you've learned in life. So one of your books you wrote, which one is it? It's the one you wrote with Jody, your wife, about... Oh,
yeah, This Word Now.
Yeah, This Word Now. There it is. This Word Now. I have it on the list somewhere, about creative writing. So you're doing that. You're teaching your drama classes and things like that. So you very much have like this desire to give information to help other people. I've seen you slather yourself with shaving cream on camera. So I'm assuming you're not just doing that for your skin beautification. You want to give to other people. You want to share these joys, this passion, this information you've gotten. Where does that come from? That's curious to me. Something I heard somebody say one time is that this knowledge I've gained, it's not for me to hold, it's for me to give. And I really, truly believe that. So everything that I've learned, I try and share that back out for other people, because it's, you know what I mean? It's not like my one ring, it's not my precious for me to just hoard for myself. It was given to me, and so I want to give it to other people. I'm just curious, where does that come from in you think?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's probably multiple little motivations. I think one is I'm a hideous people pleaser, to a fault, that I want people to like me, and that can that sometimes can motivate well, but often it's based on all kinds of insecurities and everything. Yeah. But then I think the other thing is I especially doing comedy, but I think at any time in front of a crowd, it's a weird place for me. I love performing. I remember once when I left Austin for a while, and I was going to be doing a stint in LA for about 6 months. And I was talking to Henry Mazza. He used to work at the Alamo Draft House. And I was like, it's going to be weird. I'm not doing any shows. Got no shows. And he's like, and I said, I'm really looking forward to it. It's like, when was the last time, Owen, that you went for more than a month without being in front of a large crowd? And I couldn't name it. It's like, you're not going to love that. That's going to get to you. You are an addict. And I was like, oh my God. And I think there's something kind of true in some ways of there's a certain rush, a certain controlled thoughtlessness that strikes me on stage and in front of a crowd that I really, really love. As far as the teaching, I mean, I think there's something similar there. There are definitely writers and artists who teach much more elegantly and more often than I do, who are much more generous, and I really appreciate them. I'm thinking about George Saunders, who's one of my favorite writers, and he just came out with a book which is based, I mean, he's one of the best writers in America today, and he just came out with a book which is basically going through the class that he teaches at Syracuse University on Russian literature, and he was just talking about how, for him, writing and then going and teaching about writing, how they fill each other up and in this cycle. And I just love that. So I find for me I when opportunities come to me about teaching, I sort of think I should go towards that because it will fill me up. That there's something I'm reminded about the things that I need to teach myself. I'm excited about the projects and the creativity of the people that I'm in class and teaching. That I mean, maybe it's just very selfish that I get a lot out of those opportunities. There's something. I mean, it's just like you said. There's something when a candle lights another candle. Neither candle is the less, right? It's just there's more light in the room. You don't lose your flame by sharing it with somebody else. You just get more light and more heat. So yeah, I think it's a good thing to be doing.
Yeah, I know when I have the opportunity to get in front of like youngsters or something like that, or if I'm doing a conference and I'm giving a lecture on something, or not a lecture, I guess it's more like a demonstration or whatever it happens to be, I get energized. It kind of feeds me. And so sometimes there's lulls between things, and that can be kind of a grind. But I don't know, sometimes I find that gives me, like this right here, begging people to be on your podcast can be kind of a grind, right? And so editing and all that stuff. But then when I get the opportunity to speak with somebody like you, that just fills me up to the top. And that will give me the momentum, the energy to kind of make it all the way through all of that low stuff, just to get back over to that other high. But I guess that's I don't know, it's still kind of a performative piece. Everybody wants to be seen in some way or another, right? And some people quite literally want to be seen, on stage in front of other people, or acknowledged. And I don't know, I feel like people who go out of their way to teach, whether it's You said it was kind of a selfish thing. I don't think so, right? Because it's a win-win in those scenarios. Don't you think?
Yes.
That
Yeah.
just because I'm getting self-fulfillment out of this doesn't mean you're not also being enriched greatly by it. So
That's so true.
yeah. And I am a believer that there's no such thing as a selfless act. Right. But I don't think that's bad. Right. If I do something nice for my wife or for my kids, right? If it's quote unquote selfish, but I feel good about it, how is that bad? Right.
Yeah.
I'm being very selfish.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe too, talking about like doing podcasts and being filled up and it's like, everyone likes playing some kind of game of ball, like I'll throw the ball around with Oscar, my youngest, and neither one of us are brilliant athletic baseball players, but we enjoy that. There's like a level of connection, and you're right. It's like, it's a win-win. And it's the same thing like talking with you now. It's like, there's something good that happens when ideas get swapped back and forth, whether it's in a classroom setting or one-on-one or one in a crowd of 1,000. It's like that energy is getting thrown around and new ideas are coming. It's like jazz musicians when they throw a melody and they're like, you take it and I'm going to change the solo, or I'm going to change it based on what you did. And all of a sudden new ideas start popping up, and man, it feels like what we're built for.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you're talking about music. I heard you were going on some kind of journey where you were trying to listen to a different genre of music every day for a while. How did that?
Yeah.
Do you think that changed you in some way?
I don't know. It's a good question if it changed me. I mean, I did do. That was part of the Texas Optimism project for the Good Newscast, and I said, all right, I'm going to try and listen to different kinds of music. One of the things that it alerted to me was how very narrow what I had thought was an eclectic taste was. I thought I had eclectic taste, but really it was really narrow, and so it was great. And I still do it, not as often as I would like to, but I still, like, just a couple of days ago, I started listening to this interesting thing. It's ancient Greek music, which for a long time it was believed by scholars we would never be able to replicate. We had some of the written music, but we just didn't know what it meant. We didn't know how to do it. But over the last decade or so, we've sort of managed to figure out at least an idea of what scholars think this music sounded like. So I've been listening to ancient Greek music, because the ancient Greeks, like the Athenians, had music all the time. They had music all the time. Like even their plays, I think their plays, if I'm understanding this correctly in my reading, had constant music. So like Oedipus Rex would have been having like music played along with all the lines. So the people who were writing it, Sophocles or Euripides, they would also be writing music along with the lines, which is kind of fascinating to me as well. But yeah, I've just been like really kind of enjoying just dipping my toes into all this different kind of music out there.
That's crazy. All right. So the idea of this is, why am I? You go back in time and let's see if we can trace a path. I'm just curious. So your baby, baby Owen is what we'll call you, little OO. And so I know you've got British parents, and you didn't come over here until you were what, like 2, somewhere in that neighborhood?
Yeah, 2.5. Yeah.
All right. So were you born over in the UK?
I was born in the UK. I was born in a town called Ascot. And Ascot, we didn't live in Ascot. We lived right outside Ascot, but Ascot's very fancy. Paul McCartney lives there. The Queen goes to Ascot to watch her horses race. It's a big racing thing. And everyone wears the Ascot ties. And the hospital room where I was in, immediately before me, one of the Rolling Stones and his wife had a baby. They were the last people in that room, is what I was known. And I was this big red baby. Like, my mom loves to talk about how, I was a bit of a difficult birth because I was this big ruddy baby. And they took me to, the special care unit, and she would go see me because I was in there for a little bit. And I was right next to all these small babies, these small babies who were having a hard time. And I was this big, healthy, and always made me feel embarrassed. Like, you shouldn't have even been there, taking up space. I'm like, oh. So that was my origins.
your origin story. I like it. No mutant spiders, nothing like that. That's fascinating. So what is that? That's so strange. So you ended up, what brought your parents over here to the States?
So my parents, who live in Austin now, and I love dearly, they they were always a bit of adventurers. They're both doctors. They met in medical school in Cardiff, which is in Wales. Actually, they met over a cadaver. Like my mom was working on the armpit, my dad was working on the crotch, and they connected, and then they got married. Yeah. And then they joined my father joined the Royal Air Force, and they were in Singapore for a couple of years with my two older brothers, and then basically shortly after I was born and my mom was pregnant with who would become my sister, and they were like, we just wanted more adventure. We want what's exciting out there. Where are the opportunities? And they were reading in a medical journal, and they found this advertisement for a small rowing town in Texas looking for doctors. They're hoping to get some doctors. And a rowing town, they're like, oh, we love rowing town, like Henley down the road, and it's got a river running through it, and there's regattas and boats, and like a rowing town. And they went through the process of checking out this place called Friendswood, and finally moved all of us over. And it was like a wild, like moving 4 kids over from England. And, gosh, it wasn't like as easy as it was to do flights well, not today, but overall. And like we arrived, and like I was 2.5, but my brothers remember with a pool. We stopped in Florida at first, and there's a pool on the roof. And they're like, oh, my God, and went to Burger King. Like, what? 3 crowns? And then they went to Disneyland in like their first day in America. Like, Disneyland! Like, as compared to 1970s England, it was like, oh, God. And then when they finally got to Friendswood, and it wasn't until like a year later that my dad was talking to the person who put the ad in the medical journal and said, we love it here. It's really nice. There's a lot of creeks. Not really a river. Where's the rowing? It's like, oh, small rowing. Yeah, that was a typo. Small growing town. So, I found I ended in Texas thanks to a typo.
That's fantastic. So were you the baby?
No, I had a younger sister. So when we moved, my little sister was 6 months old.
Holy cow. So 6 months, 2, and then how old were your other siblings?
Let's see, my brother, I had another brother who was almost 7 and at the time, and then another brother was 9. So we had like 4 kids under 10.
Oh, well, you got screwed on that Disneyland trip then.
I did.
Yeah, you're 2 years old. You probably don't really remember any of that, but that's all right. So growing up in Texas, you've got these English parents, right, who obviously have different customs, different ways of speaking. I'm assuming they still maintain their accents pretty well, right?
Oh, yeah. You'd love them, Greg. Every now and then we've called them during a pancake show. I think
I've heard your mother. Yes.
And they've got their accents and they're delightful. Yeah, it was it was really kind of interesting to grow up in this small Texas town, with little British customs. So having roast lamb every so often, or my parents having tea every morning and stuff like that. It was kind of a good combination. I think it kept me off guard a little bit. Like, okay, I'm not sure if I belong here, if I belong there. When I went back I had a strong British accent as a little kid. And I'd go to England, and they were like, ooh, getting a Texas accent. Oh, it's interesting. But yeah. So
growing up, I'm assuming you got used to the way your parents did things, and you would go to your friend's house. And do you remember anything that kind of like shocked you? I mean, there's the cliche stuff like nobody drinks hot tea over here, right? You're in Texas, you're going to be drinking cold iced tea, and it's going to be so sweet you get a diabetic coma from it.
Right. All right, I tell you the 2 things that were difficult for me in moving to Texas or growing up and visiting friends' houses was peanut butter and jelly and hot dogs. And I didn't like them. And my mom was like, listen, you're living in Texas. You're going to have to learn to like peanut butter and jelly and hot dogs. And so I did. I basically more and more like sort of trained myself to like peanut butter and jelly. Like, but I thought peanut butter and jelly was disgusting.
That's hilarious. Oh, did your friends find your parents pretty amusing growing up?
Yeah, they still do. My parents were the doctors in this small town, and I think all my friends would go see them as their doctors. And, that was always interesting. Like, well, your dad asked me to cough today. Well, it was a weird day. But yeah, my parents, I think people get a kick out of my parents.
Gotcha. That's awesome. That's awesome. So you're growing up in Texas. When did the horror obsession, you think, creep in? Do you remember kind of the early days of maybe some of your first scary experiences there?
Totally. I mean, we kind of lived surrounded by woods, and I love walking in the woods and everything. Like, kind of hated the idea of being scared. But then, like, my dad was a big Stephen King fan, and my dad writes novels as well. He writes these sort of medical thrillers. So it was definitely all that was there. But then there was a couple of key moments. I remember staying up late and watching Night of the Living Dead playing on television. And, and of course, it was like black and white. What's scary about this? Come on. And just being terrified of some of the basements and some of this, and being like, oh my God. And that just sort of stuck with me. And then we had videos, stores started popping up around this time. And I remember there was a video store right next to basically the Eckards and like this little microcosm of stores. And I would go down into this mom and pop video store. And it wasn't that we were renting these videos, but I would just like go one by one and pick up the boxes and look at the scary cover and read what it was about. And I just loved those, all those movies, whether it was Chopping Mall or The Stuff or whatever it was, just being like, just like blowing my mind and my imagination. And so like pretty early on, I started kind of writing those kind of short stories. Like my first, not my first short story, but the first story was like, this feels good, was something called The Morgue. And it was all about a morgue worker having sex with dead bodies until the body comes to life, and we find out all about his life and what got him there. It's like, yeah, this is it. This is the kind of stuff I dig. And I was writing other stuff as well, but I don't know. There was something just kind of thrilling and chilling about all that.
That makes you think of like that 80s movie, The Mannequin, but just, very different twist.
Yeah.
That's interesting. So you were talking about your dad. Your dad's a writer. Did you get a little bit inspired? Were you trying to do a little emulation there, or is that just happenstance?
My parents both write. My dad writes fiction as well as being a doctor. My mom writes essays and stuff like that. And I always thought that was very, very cool and really encouraged me. And maybe like before I even knew it, but for whatever reason, I knew really early on I wanted to be a writer. I just thought that was just the coolest thing. And then even as time went on, I know a lot of people, I was talking to a friend about this, and like, well, I love having written, that feeling of like, I love when something's done. I love that. But I love writing. Like, I love the experience. For me, when I'm in the right kind of place and I'm moving, it feels to me like white water rafting. Like it feels like that. This feels like adventure. This feels like I'm participating in the world and ideas and feelings around me in a radical boom, boom, boom kind of way. That sort of feeling. It's actually kind of similar to being on stage when John and I are doing something kind of crazy of like, oh my God, that kind of adventure. And it's a weird thing to imagine that that's happening while I'm typing, but there's a similar thrill.
That's fascinating. That's just that it's an adventure, whitewater rafting. That's like a very violent experience that you're talking about there. Like, I don't know, like I would say that you're talking about when you're in the zone, right? Is that kind of like when you're feeling it? And for me, it's more of like this smooth dance, like where just kind of like I just know that I'm in it and everything just feels right. As opposed to, I wish I had like this adventure feeling associated with it. It's fascinating. Like I'd never thought about it like that. That it's like I'm going out and I'm kicking ass at this thing, as opposed to just like everything's just kind of locking into place. It's really
it's an interesting thing. Like, I love that smooth dance part, and I've experienced that too. Sometimes there's a place where you like craft, and the stuff that you've taken time to learn comes into it, and you're like, yes, I know what I want to do, and I know how to do it, and I'm moving toward that. That is a great feeling and a really valid part of the writing experience for sure. But the other part of it that I think I'm talking about, and this is something I think I experience more in prose and screenwriting, is I would like to experience them both, but is that danger feeling. So I remember once when I got a chance to do a semester overseas in England, and I had this old typewriter, like a real typewriter that I had bought because I was like, I think I was so into the beats, I think, at that time. And I was just sort of writing. I was like, I started doing this experiment where I can never write what I know the next sentence to be. So if I know what the next sentence is going to be, I have to write something different. This was the experiment I was doing. I was like, let me just sort of do that and see what comes out.
Sounds like improv.
It's a lot like improv, yeah, but it was also like forced improv. Like it was like I'm not even going to. I'm going to get to my third idea, but the one that I haven't vocalized yet, the one that I only hear when it's typed on the, because you can think faster than you can type. Mm-hmm. So I was like, gone. And sometimes ideas would pop out that scared me, like ideas that were like dangerous to me, and confessions to myself or revelations or serious doubts. And that with the white water rafting of like, moving at a speed that's just a little faster than you can control. So you can still kind of steer things, but there's something faster than you pushing it. It's still you, of course, but that's the zone that I'm talking about there.
That's interesting. So I have made so many notes. I have so many. You say one thing and I write 10 notes. But one of the things you were talking about was a typewriter. When I think about a typewriter, I think about paced interaction, because it's not exactly the fastest medium to put your ideas down in. And I was thinking about that's how I think, a couple of things. I fell in love with audiobooks for a multitude of reasons. I love to hear stories and storytellers. And Owen, brother, I think there's no secret here. You are a storyteller, and everybody who's ever heard you talk for 5 seconds wants to hear more. I think there's no doubt about that. But something I learned about me that I like about audiobooks is that it's paced. And so when it gets to the exciting part, if I'm reading a book, I am flying through, and I guarantee I'm going to miss some details. But an audiobook removes that control from me, so I'm forced to listen to it at the reader's pace, and so I really absorb that information. And I don't know, it kind of there's this anticipation about it that I really enjoy. Do you think the pacing of a typewriter had anything to do with the state of mind you were in at the time?
That's a great question. I'm totally with you on pacing. The interesting thing in a horror screenplay, actually this is the same thing for horror and for comedy, where it is slowing down that moment right before the jump scare or the punchline. It is like, how do you manipulate that pace? I think maybe so. I think maybe there was something about that sort of rhythm. My wife would be wiser to talk about this. My wife Jody does something called Typewriter Rodeo, which she does with some other writers in town. And they have this really beautiful book where they do spontaneous poems on vintage typewriters for people, and they do it at different events and everything like that. Tom Hanks has been writing them fan letters, which is cool, on his own typewriter. Which is super cool. But there's some great things that they've all said. Sean Petrie has said some really beautiful things about his love of a typewriter. But I think, and Jody was saying this, I think maybe this is part of it that struck me of when I was at that age, 19, 20, and I was typing on a typewriter for these kind of exercises. One of the things was there is a physical indentation on a page with ink in it. Same thing. It wasn't just like a computer file or anything like that. Like, you put it down, and that kind of permanence, along with the sort of freedom of you can just write anything, you never have to show anybody. Those type of things combined, I think, added to kind of some of the chemistry of that, the sort of headiness. There's definitely also, you're right, there's like a rhythm, and then you pull the paper out and you feed the note. There's a music to it all. And I think maybe part of it was just sort of like, it is a reminder that in such a bizarre way, writing is a physical endeavor. that although it seems like it's all in the head, there is also, and I don't know what that connection is, but there's also very much a connection to the body.
That's fascinating. When you were talking about the typewriter and it creating something real and physical, and the bumps. I almost got goosebumps right there. Like, I don't know, that really resonated with me. The idea that you make it real. So at one point in my life, my wife and I were photographers, wedding photographers. So we did that for a long time. And so I've noticed that today a picture means nothing to anybody because we all have these magic little picture boxes in our pockets, right? These smartphones. And so it's lost meaning. And what used to be so meaningful for me is we would take 1,000 shots and I would print sometimes just for me of these other people. And just having that physical media in front of me, I don't know, it would just evoke this almost this awe-inspiring I know it's kind of sort of masturbation there because it was my picture, right? But it would give me this feeling of connected to these people in a way that just looking on a screen never would. Yeah. So I'd never thought about written word on a typewriter kind of doing that same thing for a writer. That's really interesting. How that's kind of lost these days. I guess the physical representation of our creativity.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'm not sure. It'll find its way again. All these kind of, because of course there was someone saying, "Oh my God, these new photographs are really ruining what paintings were. Paintings used to mean something," and I'm sure someone was like, "Well, these bound books. Oh, gosh, remember when it was papyrus? That's when it counted."
Yeah.
So I mean, there's always sort of that change going on, but there is that just sort of good reminder. I mean, I'm a fan of poetry, of reading poetry, and I think one of the reasons I am is because in a world like you said, where we've got so many photos, they're all over the place. And we have so many words, there's billions of words putting out there all the time, that poetry says, I'm going to choose so few words. I'm going to choose maybe 19 words. And that's all I'm putting on the page. And the rest is sort of blank on that page. And spend some quiet time with this. And I mean, I think it's also what happens when you say, I'm going to take this photo and I'm going to develop this one and I'm going to frame this one. And all of a sudden, something that was in the noise becomes an individual sound. That there's something to be appreciated that way. And it's found in the presentation, but in the end, it's got to be the viewer, the consumer, the reader, including myself, because I've rushed by a poem. What a silly thing to do, to rush through a poem. In the same way that I've clicked through photos, like click, click, click. That taking that moment to be present with words or an image or a person or an idea or an element of gratitude, it makes it is the taste of life. Like, it is the way to enjoy the meal. It is to appreciate each bite, right? So yeah,
I like too about and this is like with art or pictures. I like pictures because I can look at it and I can enjoy it for how I want. So I've been guilty of this where I see somebody enjoying something that I like and I can't help but think, you're enjoying that wrong. It's like, you're not enjoying the way I would, so it's like sometimes I like a picture where it doesn't just spell out everything for me. Like, it's open to interpretation. And some poems I've read are the same way, right? It's not telling me exactly how to think or feel about this thing. I get to interpret that on my own. And I don't know. I don't tend to read something on Facebook or LinkedIn where it does that to me. It seems like I have those more meaningful interactions in the real world or from people. Really, most often that happens from talking to another person, another human for me.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Yeah. I mean, music, it seems to me that, if there was a language that made most sense for theology, it would be the language of music. Like, because we're talking about the ineffable, the things that we can't quite find words for, and that's what like images give us. Images like I can tell you what that image is, but I can't tell you what it means. Its power is that. It's like sometimes someone would ask me like, "Oh, you wrote this novel, so what does it really mean?" I'm like, "Well, if I could have said it in a more succinct way, I would have." It took the story and this to try and get to it. But I think you're right. Like, we sometimes want to distill ideas, concepts, and opinions into tweets, and we lose something. We lose beautiful pointing towards what we cannot say that is found in poetry and photography and music.
You know what fascinates me about some of this stuff is like, I think about things a little too much sometimes. And so I've thought before about, it's so strange that I can think a thing, I can say words, those words get converted into waves that travel through space. They go into your ears, and then when they go into your brain, you feel some way. So I can make a sound, and it makes you like it evokes an emotion inside you, and that has always seemed so amazingly powerful to me. You know, and just, I mean, it's the same whether I'm saying it or whether I'm writing it. Just the fact that I can do something that will evoke. Hopefully, it's a good emotion. You know, like I think I'm somewhat of a people pleaser. I just don't want anybody to not like me. I don't know that you need to necessarily like me. I just don't want you to not like me. But yeah, the idea that I'm sure you've done this before, where so I'm an ordained minister too, Unity Life Church online, 5 minutes, and so I've done a couple of weddings, and there's something about being up in front of there. And those, when we were wedding photographers, there's something I learned that it changed me a lot. So one thing is, you get, as a photographer on that day, we would get there before anybody else did, right? And so we'd spend the entire day with them, you know. So we'd see them go through all of the gambit of emotions, right? From apprehension, fear. We'd see, you know, fights sometimes, but generally you're surrounded by all of the favorite people you have in the world, and you almost instantly become family. And so I kind of got addicted to that emotion, right? So this is neither here nor there, but as a child I learned to suppress emotion, and so as an adult I'm finally learning to feel things again. And so that was a big catalyst for change in me, and it was the craziest thing, because this thing I had been denied myself my whole life, I'm getting all of it in one day. Right, and so it's crazy that gambit of emotions you can find in there, but you know, like, and I think I've kind of lost the thread here, because I just got too into what I was saying. But it's interesting how we can evoke emotions in front of each other, and so whenever I would be marrying a couple, you know, I'm up in front of these people, I could make them laugh, and then I could say something, I could make them cry. And then I could bring it all home with a big swell, and then make them laugh right at the end, you know. And just the ability to control emotions in others has been, not necessarily, that sounds weird, evoke emotions in others has been really transformative for me. And I don't know, I think that's kind of the piece I'm addicted to when it comes to outputting, you know, creativity in some way, shape, or form. I don't know. And when I'm talking to people like you, I get so much more from this than anybody else will. I'm doing this 100% for me, because I've already picked up some things that I'm probably going to carry the rest of my life with, which is so fascinating. Just talking to people, how you can pull all these things out of them.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. I love what you're saying about like that addiction to being able to evoke emotion. I mean, the two places, you know, I've given so much of my time to comedy and horror, and then my novels are kind of somewhere different than that. But both of those, I am eager to hear you laugh out loud, like make an audio sound to say, "Aha, I'm responding," or scream. Like, I want you to make an uncontrolled audio reaction to what I'm doing to let me know it's doing something. But I think you're so right, of those magical moments when people are like at a wedding, these few moments in our culture which we set aside as being somewhat sacred, and we move into a position of openness if we are doing it well. There was this old improv exercise that I used to love. We called it gibberish UN, and gibberish was, you know, an improv tool where you just make up like gibbly bobbly boo. You just make up languages, and we would sort of teach folks like, well, how do you do this? And you know, what's the way to do it? And it's like, oh, well, you take a little bit of what that person said and you repeat some of their made up words. So gibbly bobbly boo, gibbly. And then suddenly you're bouncing back and forth. But the exercise that I would love, that I would teach non-performers. This would be like a group of bankers or some teachers or nursing home workers that would invite us to come in and do a workshop. And sometimes I'd have them do these exercises where you have two people and you say, okay, start talking to each other in a language that doesn't exist. And because, one person has an actual thing they're trying to communicate, and the other person's trying to hear it. And all of a sudden you have these two people who have worked together for years, but now they're intently listening to each other, and they're looking at each other because they're trying to understand what the other person's saying, and they can't rely on the definition of the sounds coming out of their mouths. And it teaches, like, okay, so how do you actually listen? How do you hear somebody? And don't just rely on the written, the words. There's so much more being communicated than just the words coming out of their mouths. Not only was it wild to watch them looking and feeling at each other, but the people who were kind of sitting outside watching, the audience in a case, they would be riveted. It was, entertaining is not the right word. There was something just so intriguing when you see people trying to connect. And that moves us in a way. I mean, we talk about it when, like, oh, those two actors really have chemistry. Like, there's something when you like, look at that. Like, we can't quite see it, but they're so open. There's like photons going back and forth, something on the quantum level or something, like, and a connection is being made. And I think, again, it's like, it's what we're designed for, that there's something exciting and wonderful watching or experiencing or participating in that kind of striving to connect.
Do you think exercises like that have made you more intuitive in your relationships with other people? You know what I mean? Because to me, that sounds like you're paying attention to a whole lot more than just the words, right? The body language, the unspoken, well, obviously the unspoken things in between. Do you think that's really assisted you in life?
I do, I think, but I think I also, part of the reasons I got into like improv was because I love that kind of thing. I mean, I was a middle child. So middle child, you're always kind of like reading the room, finding out like what's going on. And I was the clown, like I want to make everyone laugh and like make sure everything's okay. But also, I mean, like Jody and I, we met doing improv, and it has had a big impact on the way that we love each other, and the way we raise our kids, and the way we manage a household. It's been actually a very sweet gift to us in that kind of way.
That's interesting. It's fascinating. So your kids, do they ever get tired of you making jokes?
Oh, all the time. Oh my God. Yeah. They got really tired. And who knew I was making dad jokes? I didn't know I was making dad jokes until I guess I became a dad, but
it just wasn't official until you became a dad. Yeah.
Right. It was just jokes.
Yeah. You don't get your stamp, your seal of approval until then. Yeah. But yeah.
So yeah, I think they get tired, but I feel very lucky that we laugh a lot in our house.
Yeah. Yeah. We do too. And, my kids, my youngest, apparently something I learned is that children don't understand sarcasm. But if you use sarcasm enough, they learn it earlier than most other children.
Yeah.
It just one of my kids took a little bit longer to pick up on sarcasm than the other. But we live our lives through humor. I can't walk by my 12-year-old without him slapping my butt. Apparently that's become our love language. It's smacking each other's butts. I don't know how that happened, to be honest with you. I guess we're just always good gaming each other.
Yeah.
But it's so funny how, and also what's really weird, I'm just curious about this too. For other people is that my wife and I will hear something that's just, it hits us just right. And that little phrase will stick with us for the next 20 years. We'll be saying it to each other. Right. And so we've got so many bizarre ones that make sense to nobody else, that comes out of our mouths in public often. So I'm assuming you guys do that too, right?
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of like, isn't that the history of language, or like isn't really language just a collective inside joke? Right? like, hey, that clear, refreshing stuff, water. Remember we called it water 2,000 years ago? Like, oh yeah, water. I know what you mean. And there's something like that always happens. Like the amazing thing that can happen when you like, hey, here's something we share, whether it's a joke or a flag or a national pride or whatever, all these different things. There's something powerful about that feeling of belonging. So yeah,
fantastic. So
humor does that.
I'm going to reel us back just a couple of minutes because I wrote down something that really tickled something in my brain. And it was, you talked about dangerous ideas when you were doing your typewriter, that sometimes dangerous ideas would come out. And that's sort of my relationship with horror, is that, like, I don't know, I've got this weird feeling inside me whenever I watch it. It's like, I almost know that I'm not supposed to be watching it. You're right. It's not the thing I was supposed to do. And so I grew up a good Baptist kid for a little while until I decided I wasn't going to be anymore. And the one thing I carry the most with me through all that is a lot of guilt associated with religion and not doing things. And so one of those things was, like watching horror movies. I knew I wasn't supposed to, but I would get this weird little thrill from it, and I wanted to. So it always... dangerous ideas. That is such a good quantification, like putting it into words how I felt about my relationship with horror, is that I still kind of like it, but I still kind of feel like I'm probably not supposed to. I'm a grown ass man, right? But I still kind of feel like I'm not supposed to be watching this.
Yes.
And so I was just curious, what are the dangerous ideas? What kind of emotion is that evoking you when you think about that? Where does that come from? You touch on a lot of great things. I think one of the things, this is true in comedy and horror, is you create the taboo, right? So it's like you were saying about when you were introducing Mr. Sinus when we first were doing it back, at the beginning, in 20 years back or so, and Sharon Pollitt and John Erler and I were doing those first shows, that we were all of a sudden doing the show kind of like Mystery Science, but we were saying fuck. Or something like that. It's like, oh my God, like we were stepping into the forbidden. And it's also, you'll find it with a 2-year-old. A 2-year-old's like realizing, like, oh my God, I can do something that's just over the line, right? And that's exciting because we're stepping into unexplored territory. We're stepping into the forbidden. And that's I think that creates a sort of thrill to us. And again, like, I think we're kind of genetically, we're kind of like, we are the explorers, we are the ones that stepped out of the cave and went running after the wildebeest or whatever it is, that we are driven by risk. That's a really alluring. I also think, though, and this is, I think, maybe the bigger thing with dangerous ideas for me is I am a believer in writing really weird first drafts of stories and screenplays and novels. And part of what I do is I try and get into a place where I talk about a bouncer in my brain. And the bouncer in my brain is basically checking all the ideas, like who gets to go to the front of the room, and get to be actually seen. And, when we're little kids, there's basically no bouncer. Kids will say everything and they'll do it. They'll take off their clothes in public. But there's no limit to their creativity. They're just like, you ask a 6-year-old and the 6-year-old, like, hey, I'm going to make up a name of a creature. You tell me the history. And they're like, great. And they'll rattle off for a Wikipedia page about some gibberish word that you just said to them. Yeah. You get a 36-year-old and say, hey, I'm going to just make some stuff up. And they're like, oh, I can't think of anything. Of course they can. There's billions of explosions going on in their brain all the time, but they've got this bouncer. And the bouncer who showed up around puberty was like saying, don't say that. That's going to sound stupid. Don't do that. They're going to judge you for that. Just quiet down. None of those ideas. So I try and get to a writing stage where, and I think comedy too, where I give the bouncer the night off and I let all the ideas, especially when I'm writing, because I know no one's going to see this. It's just me right now. I let all those ideas in. So all of a sudden those ideas come in, and it's not the first idea. The first idea is not dangerous. First idea would have shown up anyway. The second, the third, they're not dangerous. The fourth is just a bad idea. And the bad ideas start coming in. And usually the bouncer will be like, shut the door, this party's getting bad. But the bouncer's gone. So the door's open. And all of a sudden, way, way back in the back of my head, there's some really freaky idea, really kind of dangerous idea. He's like, well, I usually could never get in, but the door's open. So I'm going to show up to this party.
And that idea comes in, and along with some ugly ideas, some weird ideas, maybe even some offensive ideas. But in that crowd of ne'er-do-wells who shouldn't usually get to the front of their brain, there's one idea, like that one, that dangerous one. That's the one I'm going to dance with tonight. And so come on in. And so that's what I mean by dangerous ideas. The ideas that the bouncer, me, usually keeps at bay because they're too scary or offensive or difficult or saying something about myself or the world that's really hard to hear. Those are the ideas that I want to bring on in.
Do you find a lot of those ideas that you consider scary are scary because it's something about you that you just don't want to examine? You kind of don't want to look at too close?
Yeah. It's either, I mean, something scary about me or something scary about the world. I mean, my last novel, Hollow, was about, I basically was thinking about the book of Job a lot. And so it's like, I have a guy who loses his child. His child dies, and he is basically grappling with what is there's a lot of humor in this book too. It sounds like a laugh riot, I know. But it's like, what does it mean? It's like, how can the world be so painful and so beautiful? Is there a heart at the center of everything, or does the universe just not care? Like, could it be that human beings are the kindest thing in the universe, that we're the only ones who hurt for the pain in the universe? I don't know. And so I wrote a book, and I was basically like, I'm going to go to my scariest thoughts, the thoughts I don't want to think about, the ones that I want to push away, and find out what happens if I spend some time there. And they did tell me stuff about myself, and did tell me stuff about how I felt about the world and what I would discover if I stayed with those questions and stayed with that pain. So yeah.
Once you
dangerous work writing, dangerous.
Once you look at those ideas, and I mean, you put a lot of time and energy and effort into fleshing that out into a book like The Hollow. Does that help you maybe conquer that fear a little bit? Does it make you get a handle on it, perhaps? Or does it still feel dangerous and scary to you even after the book?
That's a great question. Let me think. I don't think I was looking to conquer a fear. I think maybe I was looking to befriend a fear, if that makes sense.
Sure. Instead of beating the scariest guy up in prison, you just make friends with him. I get it.
Yeah, maybe so. I think it was like, I think I was asking a huge question there, and I think I found for me my answer of something about the nature of life. And it's not that the universe is good or bad. It's definitely not what you'd call fair. It's not like that, or just. I don't think it's any of those. But it is something that I would describe as, for lack of a better word, holy. Like, there's something amazing about being alive and the living world and all of that. It doesn't mean that it's going to be good or bad, or everything's going to turn out right in the end, or all wrongs will be righted. No, doesn't mean that at all. It's beyond. I mean, to borrow a phrase from Rumi, it is the field beyond good and bad, or good and evil, and I'll meet you there. Yeah, but I don't know if that necessarily conquers the fear or puts it at bay, but it gives me some understanding, perhaps.
That sounds,
and maybe some peace.
Sounds like bravery to me, right? Going into a situation where it's something scary, and at the end it's still going to be scary to you. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I think most people would shy away from that, right? They think, I don't want to look at this because I know it's still going to remain the same. Although with me, understanding generally removes the fear part, right? If I understand, like if I could take something and I can put a handle on it, I can turn it around, I can figure it out, then I can set it on a shelf. While I understand it's still the same thing, it's just, I don't know, I got a handle on it now.
Yeah, I think there's something to it, Greg. It's like when you're talking about being like feeling this a little bit forbidden to watch horror movies.
Yeah.
Right? Like, because you're doing that scary thing where you're like, I'm going to go into a movie that is about people being killed, like, 6 camp counselors being killed by a mass killer. And at the end, I'm still going to be terrified of mass killers. It won't give me the answer of like, how do I escape that mass killer?
Yeah.
It doesn't have that. But there is something it offers in writing and watching and all this. It offers this like playground where, okay, I have to know about my mortality, but here's a playground. I can play with it in this book or in watching this movie, even, where I can play with all those feelings. I can, as you said, pick it up and look at it and examine it. And it's not real here. Like it's only a playground here. So I can be scared. I can yell. I can feel my heart palpitate. I can consider in some on a level, fear of death without being in danger of death in that moment. And so I think that's kind of one of the values of art, is to kind of like allow us to be in those situations.
Yeah, it's like being on a roller coaster. While it's fear of death, you know that you're still tethered in, and you're, at the end of it, you're going to get off. Maybe you threw up, but you'll, no worse for the wear. So that makes me wonder if you like the palpitations and you like the fear. How are you with haunted houses? Is that your bag?
Love them. Yeah, love them. Scarier the better.
Do you remember going to them as a kid and things like that? Was that when your love affair with that fell into place?
In Friendswood, where I went to school, there was a school called Westwood Elementary, and actually Richard Linklater went there as well. He was a little older than me, but they would do this one fair day. And before I even got to elementary, I was like, "Oh, Westwood Day!" And it was such an exciting day. The whole all town would went, and they turned this one classroom into a haunted house, and it was just trash bags, and, like you walk. And I remember that being like, I got to get enough tokens to go and then go again and then go again. I thought it was the coolest thing.
That's awesome. Did that ever make you want to be part of a haunted house?
What we do at our house we didn't do it this year, but every year we at our house started when my daughter was just like 2. We started doing something called the Spooky Path. So we invite trick-or-treaters to walk like the path around our house, kind of going back around, and sometimes through the shed here. And we set up scary things. So, jump scares and different surprises. And then not this last year, but the year before in 2019, the kids took over. They made basically a storyline that would take place as you walk through. And it's become like kind of a hit in our neighborhood. We'll get like hundreds of trick-or-treaters going through our spooky path every year. And it's not like, we don't put like a lot of money into it. But we have this other friend, like a friend named Eric, who's very good with like a drill gun and stuff like that. So he'll help me like just, drill stuff and put up crazy stuff. And so we get to have our own haunted house every year. And that's a real thrill.
That's awesome. So you get to do a little bit of that there, but then I guess writing and directing, making horror movies is the ultimate way to, scare masses all at once, right? So that's you getting to fulfill that young fantasy, I guess, of being. Because what better way? If you make a horror house, you might be able to scare a couple hundred people. If you make a scary movie, you're going to be able to scare millions, right?
Yeah, hopefully. The movie Bloodfest that I made is about like it's about a horror festival. Where basically when you get there to Bloodfest and you go through the gates, every land is sort of a different genre of horror films, so like there's Zombieville and there's the slasher land, and here's where the Draculas or vampires hang out, and you can kind of move around, and I got to play the I guess the ringleader in it. And it was so freaking fun. It was so much fun making that movie, but seeing, all these like places come to life. I'm like, and I just had a blast. And I really get such a kick out of working with my team on set and then my editor afterwards and sound effects and our composer, just to like, how do we orchestrate a scare? How do we orchestrate a moment where people are like, oh, and jump and hopefully go like, oh, and then a beat, and then they laugh afterwards. Those kind of moments I love experiencing. And if I can cook some up, though, all the better.
That's awesome. That's so, after I watched Mercy Black, I saw the trailer for Bloodfest, and Bloodfest seems like my cup of tea for sure. Cause it looks to me like horror mixed with comedy, right?
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
That is like, I mean, that's peanut butter and jelly for me, but not like the early Owen kind, like the post. It's like maybe peanut butter and chocolate. Does that work better for you?
Oh yeah, I like peanut butter and jelly now. I learned how to like it. Now I find it delicious.
Oh, I'm so convinced. But yeah, I love that. I mean, because it seems like it would combine most of your loves together, right? Comedy as well as that stuff. So something else that's curious to me is, how does one decide they want to write and direct a movie? So you'd been a writer for a long time. I mean, you've been very prolific for a really long time. What kind of, I mean, that's just curious to me. It's like there must have been some kind of weird tickle in your brain that said, this is something I need to do. Did you just get a wild hair up your butt one day or what?
Yeah, so I mean, like, let's see, the quick story of it is, I always wanted to be a writer. At some point, I realized if I didn't have to pay rent, I didn't have to work a job, and I could give more time to writing. So I moved into a VW camper, a pop-up camper, and I basically lived mainly here in Austin. And I would swim at Barton Springs and shower, and then I'd write at coffee shops all day, and then I'd do like comedy gigs at night, and some weird like hosting Home Shopping Network or weird gigs like that, or Jack in the Box secret tester, and then as my first book, there was a small film company. It was like optioned it, and I started thinking about screenplays and that nature. And then I was working at the Alamo. I started doing sinus shows with John and Germ, and we started doing stuff like that. And I started thinking more and more about movies. It was like my film school. And I remember seeing like Richard Linklater's Waking Life, which had a bunch of Austin folks in it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that is is there anything closer to creating something that like an everlasting art than a film? I don't know. It's so exciting. And so I started thinking more and more about it. And then I got kind of lucky, and I slipped into screenwriting with two friends, Russell Sharman and Chris Moss. And we were this screenwriting comedy trio. We were doing like a lot of Hollywood work and for the big Hollywood rewrites and stuff like that. And it was really, really fun. But along the way, I was like, but I sure would like to do horror, but am I cool enough? I don't know. And then at some point I was like, no one's going to let me direct or ask me to direct. Right. If I want to do this, if I want to sort of jump to that as well, then I have to make my own way. So I took two short stories of mine that were in my collection, How Best to Avoid Dying, and I started writing the script called Follow. And then I hooked up with a producer I know, Seth Kaplan, and basically just sort of worked to write the cheapest kind of script I could so that someone would give me enough money to make it. And eventually I filmed a short based on that screenplay, like a 5-minute short, and I got into South by, and that sort of helped me move around and get some more tension, and finally get the people I needed to basically believe that I could do it. And I really enjoyed it. I got to direct that first film. Like, this is super fun. I love the process. I'm learning a lot. I'm jumping into the water and learning how to swim. And so, yeah, I feel like, I don't know. I think as you were talking about how like Bloodfest kind of combined, directing a film and writing a film kind of does that as well. Like, I get to do all the sort of solo work, like alone with an idea and a keyboard, click, 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 click. And then I get to be part of this group of people kind of making it all come together, working with people and that sort of excitement. And then you go back with the editor, and again, you're solo and you're trying, just you and the editor trying to make it work. I think I dig all that.
So at what point did you meet Jody and you guys start dating, all that stuff? Like, where in this timeline?
Oh yeah, I was living in the VW van.
I'm assuming you guys hung out at her house, not yours.
We usually hung out at her house, yeah. So yeah, I was living in the VW van, and I'd been like on a big kind of road trip, and she had just moved to Austin for grad school and was basically had auditioned for the improv troupe I was in at the time, and I showed up, and they're like, "Oh, Owen, you're back, hey!" for this rehearsal, and I was like, "Who's that cute girl in front row? I'm gonna go sit next to her." And so I sat down next to her.
There you go. So that was before. Oh wait, had you published any books at that point?
Published a couple of short stories, but no, I was still working on my first book.
So she's a PhD in English, right?
Yes.
Excellent. So did she kind of help you with any of that?
Oh, hell yeah. I mean, Jody, Jody helps me in every kind of way, but like that was early on. Like I remember her first time like reading this novel I was working on, and she was a PhD, working for a PhD in English, and she had gone to Swarthmore, and I was like, this is if I later she told me she was thinking the same thing, like what happens if Owen's a bad writer? What's going to happen here? But luckily she liked what I was writing, and she is always my first reader. I'm dyslexic, and so I've got typos in everything I write. So she helps me in that case. I can't send an email basically without her reading it, but also is just my first reader of like ideas and telling me if it's working. And sometimes she can just tell me just with an expression, like, "So what'd you think about that screenplay?" She's like, I'm like, okay, all right, I got it. I'm just gonna take it back and get back to work. And
It's awesome. That's awesome. So, on some of that early work, like I guess whenever she read your first one, did she give you like some indication halfway through? Did she read the whole thing and then talk to you? Were you holding your breath the entire time? I mean, what was kind of the feeling there?
if I remember correctly, the way it was working was this is a good question. This is going back to the 90s. But as I remember, we were in her house on Avenue H, and basically I was printing out chapters and handing them to her, and she would be reading the chapters as I go on this draft. And I think for her, she was like, I think this, so you kind of like, okay, early on, she's like, got it. He can write. Like when you're reading a book, you're like, okay, this person is a capable craftsperson. So I think she felt okay, but then was giving me great thoughts on like, ideas and characters and setup and everything like that as well.
Was she pretty motivating? She kind of cheerlead you along the way?
We're pretty good at motivating each other, I think. And that's been like, I think an important part of, it's again, it's again part of that improv thing of like you're on a team and you're going to look better if the person you're on stage is doing better. Like, so motivating each other is a good constant part of our marriage, I think.
Do you ever find like you could tell when she's trying to like pick you up and motivate you, and you're just like, man, I'm not feeling it right now?
Yeah, and maybe more so. I'll do that. I mean, you mentioned the ball of energy and sunlight and everything like that. That can be really fucking annoying sometimes. And I think Jody's like, yeah, okay, no, thank you, no.
I get it. I know. So I'm married. I got a wife in the other room over there, and she is my biggest cheerleader. What's funny is she doesn't have to say a lot.
Yep.
Right? It's almost like if I know one person in the world believes in me and I can do it, then I'm kind of okay. And so she's always been sort of that steadfast rock for me. And it's always nice, especially when you're doing something creative. I feel probably my most vulnerable when I'm making something creative and I'm showing it to somebody for the first time, right? Because I feel like if you're an artist of any kind, and I think a lot of people are artists and they don't realize it. Like I've seen some electricians make some conduits that are beautiful. Right? Just the artistry associated with that. But whenever you make art, I think you make it for other people to see it, right? Ultimately, and that first go around for me is kind of intimidating or scary sometimes. But I know while she will give me constructive criticism, she'll always have my back, And so I think it's amazing to have somebody like that in your life, whether it's your partner or just a friend, or even if it's your grandma. I think it's nice to have that.
Oh yeah. I agree.
The momentum behind you. All right, so you're making horror films, you're doing all that cool stuff. When did you actually start teaching, like doing drama stuff? Where does that fit in?
That was the teaching stuff was always kind of along the way. Like I've never been a full-time teacher. So back again during those living in the van days, I was teaching like improv at Comedy Sports and at Zach Scott. And I've done Jody for a while was a professor at St. Ed's, and I did a semester teaching at St. Ed's, filling in for Doug Dorst, brilliant writer, and then did like Roosevelt University up in Chicago for a summer semester. So it's just little pieces here and there, and they were kind of like one of the gigs. One of the things about being being a writer, at least for me, has been constantly having to have multiple gigs, and people are like, gosh, you do everything. I'm like, yeah, well, maybe if one thing paid all the bills, I wouldn't have to. But it's one of the gigs that come along with all the other gigs that you scrape together an income with.
That makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it absolutely does. But then I'm assuming it's also a source for you to draw on for your creative process. That's awesome.
I tell you one thing, Greg, like last year, 2020. So Sundance asked me to teach introduction to screenwriting in horror and thrillers, and I was like, oh, this is so fun. I'm really excited, and I felt really pleased to be doing that. And they said, this is going to be a new thing. We've started to do more of these Zoom classrooms. I'm like, oh, I know Zoom because sometimes talk to LA, and like, great, we're going to be starting like just late February or early March or like March, I guess it was. Yeah, we're going to be starting in March, and of course we started our Zoom class right when the world was locking down, and then of course Sundance made all their classes Zoom in that way. But I had this classroom. I've taught 2 over the last year, and it's people from all over the world, from Russia, and people who are from Africa, and all Latin America, Canada, just all getting together on these Zooms, different time zones and everything, and I loved that. I loved the opportunity to be teaching and talking to them, and then doing one-on-one sessions and hearing what their world was like. And that was just so mind-opening. And it was this reminder to myself of how hungry I am because of malnourishment, because I haven't had it, of stories outside of my own experience, like stories outside of a cis white man.
Right.
Like I tell a cis white American, Westerner, like tell me what's going on in these other stories, and let me hear your voices. And I did get so much out of that, and I felt very grateful for that.
Yeah, I find myself really hungry for experiences like that too. So I've got in another life, I'm actually a super technical guy, and I have a technical podcast. And so part of that is we have this group that we sort of put together. It was all born of, I wanted to talk to my friends. So let's record it and put it out there. And anyway, it's turned into this community where we've got this Slack channel, that's just a chat system. And I've got people from all over the world, and it's those juxtapositions of where I come from, or I'll have a preconceived notion of how I do something, and they are completely different. So I remember talking to a guy named Ian in South Africa. This was when I first started kind of doing like consulting and stuff like that. And so I got up really early morning on Saturday, and I was talking to him, and we were talking about towers, right? So part of this is we put up towers, and we put these big radios on there to like shoot internet to people out in the middle of nowhere. And I was talking about here in the States, in some areas we have to worry about snow and ice, right? So ice will form up these big sheets, and it'll drop down, it'll shear off everything along the way. And he was like, yeah, we don't have to worry about that. He goes, we have to worry about baboons because they love to climb the towers and tear everything up. And I don't know. I just had this weird moment where I felt about that big, and it's just like all of a sudden, and I go, wow, baboons. And he goes, this is Africa. And it just like, I don't know. I felt so different, and it just made me want to like chase those stories and talk to those people, and just it's expanded me so much, and in ways that I would have never anticipated, right? Because you never know. It's especially like if you get Australian friends, you really never know what's going to come out of their mouths, and I don't know why they have to abbreviate everything. Like quite literally everything has to be shortened. Of course, your British roots, you guys have to rhyme everything for some reason.
Yeah.
I've never understood. I am such a junkie for British TV. Like we watch it constantly, like all the time, which is weird at first because you can't understand half of people's accents, but then, it all starts dialing in, and it's a lot of fun. So, but you know what I found? I think exotic is what I like about it. Anything that's not normal to you is exotic, and it's fascinating. So I have friends like over in the UK, they love watching US stuff. They hate the
Mm-hmm.
stuff I love over there. Like, it's boring. You know, it's just,
Mm-hmm.
it's normal and average. And so I totally understand being like avarice for like all of these new experiences.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
But for me, every time I talk to somebody like you, Owen, that's different and walked a different path, I grow as a person. Like, it makes me
Oh, cool. Yeah.
a better human, I think, in general.
Yeah. I likewise. I hear you.
All right, man. Well, I know I'm eating a lot of your time. I was wondering if we could close out maybe just talking about Pancake a little bit.
Yeah.
All right.
Totally.
So how did you, I guess I'm going to make an assumption here. You probably met your Pancake friends through your improv stuff.
Germ and I did. So back in the day, Germ was doing improv with Jody and I and a bunch of other actually a bunch of folks who are part of Master Pancake now, like Scott Chester, and Ben Bartley, and some of the other folks were back in there. We were doing comedy, sports, and different things. And Germ and I were also doing a 2-man show called Thank God It's or TGI So Thank God It's Thursday. And it was me. It was Germ. Germ is a great rock and roller as well. So he'd play songs, and then I'd play songs on my keyboard. We just went back and forth and kind of back each other up, doing songs, and it was pretty goofy and pretty fun. Germ and I did a lot of music together. So he's so good. I'm not so good, but man, it was really sweet of him to include me on those. And then when Tim and Carrie League realized they wanted to do a live movie mocking show, they had seen Germ in an independent film, and they said, "Would you put together a troupe?" So Germ got me, and then he got John. John at the time was in grad school at UT and was working towards his degrees in Latin, and was also hosting radio on the student radio station, and that's how Germ knew him. So Germ kind of connected us, and then and we started doing shows together. So no, John wasn't part of the improv world at all, but the three of us started doing shows together, and just kind of was great. The first one we did was called Nude on the Moon. It was like a Doris Wishman movie, and she made like these nudie cuties, what they're called, but like basically, a lot of naked people running around. Like this 2 scientists go to the moon and they find it's all naked. Everyone's naked. It's not as nearly as sexy as it sounds. But the Alamo had put as a joke an ad saying anyone who shows up naked gets in free. A lot of people showed up naked. There was a lot of nudity waiting in line to get into that. We had to turn people away. And so we started doing those kind of shows. And we did a few months of like kind of those kind of exploitation type movies. And then eventually we did Xanadu. I think it was John's thinking, like, John loves Xanadu, and I was a big fan of the movie too. And then we started finding the crowds got even bigger because people loved movies that they knew being mocked.
Yeah.
And so we started moving on to like, oh, let's do Top Gun, let's do Terminator, and our skits would start. I mean, you saw the Terminator skit where we did like a ballet to Bohemian Rhapsody, retelling the story of Terminator. Like, the skits were getting a little more complicated and fun, and yeah, and that was super fun. And then eventually there stuff going on. We got sued by Mystery Science Theater because our name was too close.
No, you've made it.
But, yeah, no, we've made it. We're very good friends with those folks, so it's all good. But it was like kind of the corporate end of that, and then there was a breakup among the three of us, and Germ went off in one direction, and left town, and then I stepped out of shows for a while, and John started doing shows under Master Pancake in the new incarnation, and then eventually, I started doing shows again together as well, and yeah, it's been fun. I mean, gosh, man, John and I have been doing these shows together for 20 years now. It's ridiculous, and it's so fun. I mean, I some of my most fun experiences in my life have been making jokes at the Alamo with John and the rest of the gang and all those other folks. It's just been really great.
So I've been curious, the build up. So I know you guys, obviously most of your, in the long ago, in the before times, when we would do shows where you guys would do like a run for a couple of few weeks or whatever. So you would come up with the jokes ahead of time, you would practice them. I was wondering, I bet at first it was a lot of fun. Did it turn into like, I'm doing air quotes here, did it turn into a job where it kind of was a grind, or did it still feel fresh, like you're doing a performance every time?
Oh, what a good question, Greg. I did a show like basically minutes after learning that my grandfather had died. And I remember that, and I was like, remember that specifically. Like, I know the jokes, I know the show, and I'm like, go ahead and do it. And there were two things that kind of interesting. Right before, it's like, I don't feel funny, I don't want to be here.
Right.
But the show must go on, sort of feeling. That was one part of it. The other part of it was I was able to lose myself in the show. And that was, and I had a really good time. And then it was almost like I was like, there's this pain that I've got. I'm going to put this aside, and I'm going to be here in the moment, present in the joking and laughing and the dance. Similar thing, actually, 9/11 happened, and the Alamo. Tim was like, listen, I really want you guys. It's only been a week, but I want you guys to do a show. I think it's important that we are still going forward. So we did a show, and it was a similar thing of like, don't feel funny at all. But once the show started, we were like, we can be here for a while. We can take a break from our pain and be here. And there's something to that for sure. Definitely, there were some times when it's like, okay, it's the third show of the weekend, I'm tired and everything like that. Or, I had a deadline as I'm writing things. So in between skits, I'm down below the stage, typing up on something for sure. But it's there's always sort of a wonderful thrill to it. And I gotta say, I feel very lucky to be able to do those shows. Like I said, I've always wanted to be a writer, so I'm excited that I also get paid to write and to make movies. That feels incredibly lucky as well. But being able to like also kind of come back from that and get on stage and jump around, it feeds there's some part of my soul that really feeds.
I think you touched on something that's extremely human and maybe controversial, and that's laughter at the wrong time. And I'm a big advocate of that. As anybody who's ever seen me go to a funeral, my wife is always watching me constantly because she knows I'm going to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. But that's how I deal with pain. I don't know, or negative emotion. I make a joke. That is always my go-to, because I feel like if I can't laugh at something, then all is lost. You know what I mean? It's like humor is always there to turn that emotion. I read an article that was saying that laughter, releases like dopamine in the brain. And they said even fake laughing releases dopamine in your brain, right? So it's like a natural response to your body, to kind of soothe itself. And so I've always felt like, at people's various funerals, they probably wouldn't agree whenever I would make a joke under my breath to my wife about something. But I don't know. I think it's, what is so funny is, whenever I go to a funeral, I really don't like the experience. I do feel emotion. And so sometimes, in that previous Greg where he would turn things off, I would feel things, and that was nice. But I still remember my Uncle Lee's funeral, or his wake, I guess, beforehand. It was just a bunch of the family members standing around telling the craziest stories I've ever heard in my life about this man who lived this life that I didn't even know about. I mean, I knew he was funny. He was a good guy. And that has always like stuck with me. The idea that we can celebrate somebody's life through humor, right? And so it was just this, in between laughing, people were crying. And it was just this strange mix of emotions that I had never experienced before. And to me, it felt like, what I said to myself? I said, when I die, this is how I want people to honor me.
Yeah, yeah.
I just want to be a funny story.
Yeah, right. I mean, humor, I've had those experiences too, where you go to the service and it leaves you cold and sad. Yeah. And then you go to the wake afterwards, and that's where you feel the vibrance of life remembered. Humor is like a hammer, right? And a hammer can build and a hammer can destroy. And humor is that way too. Humor has the immense power to belittle, to mock, to dehumanize, right? Where we refer to someone as like, they're not a human, they're the butt of this joke. And has been a tool that has been used by racists and sexists and oppressors throughout history. But it also can be used to humanize. Like the same idea can be used to humanize. And it is when you tell a story like, I'm laughing. I'm laughing because I understand that the element that is human in you is the element that is human in me. And it's that laughter that we share around the dinner table. You know, like one of the things I've loved about doing Master Pancake is something is like, let's get more people to the dinner table, and we're laughing at the movie and we're laughing at each other in the same way that we laugh about each other at the dinner table. When my kids laugh at me at the dinner table, it is in love. If they make a joke about me, it is in love, and it is part of that love language. And so I mean, it's one of the reasons that when we get up on the middle of the show and do a skit, we make fools of ourselves, that we dress ridiculously or don't dress. It partially is like, yeah, we should be mocked as much as the movie. And that's an important part of it, because I think that the humor in their good kind of way brings just like a warmth and an energy and a humanity to the room. I mean, you know, all right, so we're making a fart joke over Top Gun. That doesn't mean we're bringing the love of God into a room necessarily, but I think the humor has a real power, and it can have a power to heal, and it can have a power to hurt. And I think that is something to be aware of. I think sometimes comics and people overall forget that. Like, well, people are laughing, doesn't matter. I know I've struggled with that. Like sometimes, like, well, I gotta laugh. It doesn't matter. Like, it does matter. Like, what are you using? Well, your tokens that you mentioned at the beginning. Like, what are you using it for? You know, because you can be hurting people and still getting laughs, or you can be healing people and getting laughs, and, you know, make that choice.
So for people that aren't familiar with Master Pancake, we talked about one aspect where you guys rehearse jokes, you do all that stuff, but then there's the choose your own pancake, where people bring a DVD or whatever up, and they all make a case. They plead their case for doing the mock of this movie, whatever it happens to be, and then ultimately whichever one gets chosen, you guys do a live riff of it. Right. So it's entirely spontaneous and on the spot. And as much as I enjoy the pre-planned ones, my absolute favorite are the choose your. It's
me too.
The spontaneity coming out of you guys is bonkers, and I love your choose your own pancakes, Owen. You are my favorite character by far. I mean, I love all my children, obviously, but you are.
I'm with you on that, man. I love our Christmas shows. Those are something else that John and I talk a lot about, like this being something we really love, especially the improv aspect of that too. But those choose your own, I'm with you. Like, it's so much fun, and partially it's because we're all on a journey. Like, you know, there's something really fun when it's like some movie, no one in the theater except the person who bought it knows about this movie. Like, what is this crazy movie? And we all get to watch it together, and that is super fun. It feels like we're all at the same party.
So it's got to be kind of weird. So lately, after the pandemic and the lockdown, you guys obviously can't do the shows, so you've been doing them online. And we'll put some links to all of your stuff that you guys are doing on that stuff. But what is interesting to me is how involved the crowd has become. So the chat is like nonstop making jokes. And if you can get your joke to show up on screen, I mean, you get a little gold star, and you feel pretty boss. I think you probably do a little dance around the room. But what's your take on that? Have you ever thought about how much like your followers wanted to be involved in that? And it's so strange how, we all like I feel like now we're all part of the crew. We're all up on stage, right? We're all part of the troupe.
Yeah.
And all moving together. It's such a different sense of belonging, I think a lot of people have found.
I'm with you. Like, kudos to John, who has been working on that tirelessly, putting together the 4 shows a week. sometimes more. Really, just kudos to him. And like when we first did it, the first show we did during the pandemic was basically we were scheduled to do a South by Southwest show with Doug Benson, a Leprechaun, and of course it didn't happen for all the different reasons. So John and I did, so it was the first one. We were kind of streaming our old shows, but we were trying to live stream it on Facebook. We're getting kicked off every 6 minutes. It ended up being like 7 hours of like trying to get through that movie. It was ridiculous. But John did the research, and things got, of course, progressively better and everything like that. And it has been so good. But even that first one, we were realizing like, oh, this has created a room for people to gather in. Like, oh, okay, look at this crowd that are talking to each other and enjoying each other's company. And we were just the excuse to get together in that room, And I feel that with our shows now, that they're so fun, and the shows are a laugh, and it's great to see them and everything. But it does seem like at least half of the joy is the fact that the people are in this chat room, like talking to each other, making the jokes, participating, and you just get a feeling of community. And maybe it's a thing of like when you're watching a show, like back in the old days at the Alamo, you got a sense of community because it's so good to laugh with people. Oh, yeah. Like it's one thing to laugh alone, that's one thing, but laughing with a room full of people, you're just connected. It's like it's like church when everyone yells amen. Mm-hmm. Like, boy, you're all in agreement that made all of us laugh. That touched something inside of all of us. And here, of course, we're not laughing all together, but we're talking to each other and adding jokes to the screen. And I love it. It's been really good to be a part of that. Actually, I feel really pleased that is a discovery, a silver lining in such a hard year.
Do you think, given the opportunity, you're going to do Pancake for the foreseeable future? Like, does it feed you think, like emotionally? And
it does. It's one of those things like yeah, I think so. Sometimes I'm like, well, gosh, I'm getting older. Can't be silly making fart jokes. Actually, I don't make a very good fart joke, by the way. That's very in the 20 years of the jokes, I think I can only think of really like one fart joke that was mine, because I just don't make a very good. I had to get like Joe Parsons to teach me how to do a better fart noise. I was not particularly good at that. I'll leave you to guess which fart joke was mine. Oh, but yeah, I think so. I mean, working with John is just really, really fun. And John and I have like a deep enough and a complicated enough and a relationship and enough history that we're kind of brothers. and I really appreciate that. So yeah, I if I'm able to keep like, fingers crossed, because I'm always sort of like hustling, but if I'm able to keep on like writing books and movies and getting to direct some stuff and TV, and then also getting to every now and then come on stage or online and, make jokes and riff, even if it's my own film, and act like a goof. Oh gosh, it's just really, it's more than I deserve. It's really lucky. It's just, yeah, feel very grateful.
Well, I think it's a multiplied force. Every little bit of good you put out is just, it's multiplied from every single one of us to get to hear it, man. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate just you putting out all that good stuff, trying to spread the joy, that energy. Your sunlight touches a lot, but it's cast a wide glare there. So I have kept you up into the time that I said I would, and I didn't anticipate it taking so long.
Oh, Greg, this has been like so good talking. I've been having a blast.
Oh my God, dude, I get to just talk to you and keep probing you like an alien. It is so fun to talk. Everything you like, I have so many notes I didn't even get to cover. But we are at the end of this talk, and yeah, again, I can't tell you how much fun I've got. So many things I'm going to carry with me. That quote on optimism, looking at all the bad, man, that was a really good one. That was a little knowledge bomb. You hit me right off the bat with that. I've been kind of reeling after that one. I haven't got my bearings yet. But if I mean, there's a lot of different ways to contact you out there. If somebody out on the internet wanted to get a hold of you, what do you, or they wanted to take a look more at you, or is there anything you want them to particularly look at? I know you've got OwenEgerton.com. That's OwenEgerton.com. So that's one thing. But is there any particular way you'd want them to interact with you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram as well. I think probably, I'm trying to think, like, I'm probably most good about, like, if I've got something coming out or something like that, I probably usually put that out on Twitter and probably Facebook as well. Like, there's a new event or a book or something like that.
All right.
But yeah, but as you said, I'm easy to find. You just Google my name. But yeah, my Twitter is Owen_Egerton. So OWEN_EGERTON.
Excellent. Well, Owen, I guess this is where we stop the recording. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Greg. I appreciate it.
Man.